Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
It's always a question for me is the whole reincarnation issue in Buddhism. And then what is it that reincarnates?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. It's one of that question and the question of karma are both very good questions in Buddhism. Well, to what does karma attach, and what is it that's getting reincarnated, and who's getting reincarnated? And it's a very complicated and complex one. And even a lama, who's with lots of experience on this subject, would take quite a while to probably respond to that question. I'm not sure I am fit to answer it, other than to give I could make a few comments on that. I prefer to do that later, since that's a whole subject in itself. Are there any other ideas or topics today about? Yes.
I'm considering looking for a teacher, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that process, and also particularly that process in, considering that I'm gay and the implications that might have.
Okay. That's very pertinent to this group. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. I'll definitely come back to that one today. Maybe a little bit to yours. Any others? That's plenty already, actually. Okay, let's see. Let me go into a practice then, or just give you some sense as to how Tibetan Buddhists practice, and one of the central prayers or ways of setting the mind for practice in Tibetan Buddhism as a way to start the discussion today and talk. In Tibetan Buddhism, how many are familiar with Tibetan Buddhism vis-a-vis Theravada and Zen Buddhism? Tibetan? Okay. All right. It's a bit different. It centers very much on relationship with a teacher or guru or lama, with guru yoga as a heart practice within that tradition. The Vajrayana is the form of Mahayana Buddhism, which developed in Tibet around 7th and 8th century AD, and has some characteristics which distinguish it from other forms of Buddhism that are now being practiced a lot in the West. For a while in my career, my Buddhist career, I practiced with a Kagyu teacher named Kalu Rinpoche. He was an 80-plus-year-old Lama who came out of Tibet in the late 50s at the request of the Karmapa, who was the head of the Kagyu lineage. He was very much a mountain meditation master. For a good part of his life, he lived alone in a cave in the Himalayas and practiced the very rigorous yogic practices, the 6 yogas of Naropa and others that are part and at the heart of the Kagyu lineage. On retreat with him in the late 1980s, we did this prayer every morning before we began our practices for that day. And it's called the 7-branch prayer. And it's a short prayer, but in its own way summarizes the Vajrayana path in a way that's very accessible and mindful of some of the essential stuff. The prayer begins with the refuge prayer, which goes in this tradition: until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I realize Buddhahood in order to help beings. Okay. This is a Mahayana refuge prayer. Within the refuge, there's a refuge in the three jewels: the Buddha Dharma, his teaching, and the Sangha, which traditionally is defined as monks and nuns. In the West has come to include all of us, I think. And it goes on to allude and state the paramitas, the 6 perfections in Buddhism, and attainment of the 6 perfections, including the last one, the prajna paramita, which is enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. The 6 perfections, which you may know, are generosity, moral discipline, shila, shanti, patience, virya, which is effort, jhana, which is often translated as concentration, and prajna, which is wisdom. It's the attainment of the 6th paramita, perfection in Mahayana, which renders the earlier 5 perfections in the sense of being connected to the emptiness of all the phenomena and the wisdom. The prayer goes on like this: with complete faith, I prostrate to all the victorious ones and their children who abide in the 10 directions and 3 times. There are 7 stanzas in the 7-branch prayer. The first one is a statement of deference and honor and awe to the tradition and the very existence of a Buddha and all the Buddhas in the 10 directions and 3 times in the Mahayana cosmology. It goes on to say, I offer, and if you're doing a Tibetan practice, you would make a mudra like this. I offer flowers, incense, light, perfume, food, music, and many other things, both in substance and with my imagination. I ask the noble assemblage to accept them. This mudra in the Tibetan Buddhism is Mount Meru and the 4 corners of the world. And in offering this to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, one is offering the whole world and all worlds to the Buddhas for the extraordinary gift that they have given us in bringing us the Buddha Dharma and the way to freedom. Flowers, incense, light, perfume, food, and music are gifts to particular senses that we all experience every day. And one of the mindfulness practices in Tibetan Buddhism is to continually offer these sensory enjoyments, these simple gifts, to the Buddhas and all beings for the benefit of all beings. It's an expression of generosity. Okay. The 3rd verse goes, I confess all evil actions which I have done, influenced by the defilements from time without beginning until now. The 5 which ripen immediately, the 10 non-virtuous acts, and others. Can anyone here speak to the defilements? Does anyone here, can anyone here tell me or give me your understanding of what defilements are? It's a big word. We're all walking around with defilements. I don't even have a defilement cabinet. But don't be shy. Does anyone speak to what Buddha meant by defilements?
Well, as long as I'm not confusing them with hindrances, which I may be, but I think of them as being, for example, desires would be one, attachment to views and concepts would be one, attachment to right ritual would be one. Let's see, what am I losing here? Obviously, hate and anger. I've seen a lot of different lists of them, but there would be things of that sort. So that, as long as I'm not confusing them.
Well, no, defilements and hindrances are very much related.
I think it's also helpful to give the translation at disturbances, because the root of the word in Sanskrit, klesha, means disturbing or troubling the mind.
That's right.
And then there's only three basic ones, as I guess you all know: raga, dvesha, moha, attachment, aversion, and confusion, and then everything flows.
From there.
Confusion is the root, supposedly. But if you can see that, you're not confused.
Right. If you can really see it. If you can really see that one, you're in really good shape. That's true. Yeah, those are the three biggies. Delusion. And they get translated with different words too in English. Klesha is the word for defilements in Sanskrit. But the big three, are often called greed, hatred, and delusion. Yes, Snake?
Their symbolic representation, I believe, is snake, cock, and pig, isn't it?
That's right.
I'll keep them in mind too.
Right. Can you say which one of those stands for which?
Ignorance, attachment is the pig, I believe. Ignorance is the snake, and cock is attachment.
Aversion?
Which is easy to remember. It's easy to remember that one.
Okay. Is that right, Professor?
Yes, as far as I can tell. It seems to be odd that the pig is not the symbol for hate, but because they're very nasty animals, pigs, if they get their dander up. But it isn't the one for hate. It's actually the snake is the one.
Right. Pigs are greedy. I think part of our conditioning from the 60s. I think part of the conditioning from the 60s with the use of the word pig changed it a little bit for us. I mean, it's interesting. Actually, all three of those animals can be interpreted in different ways in some ways. Okay, anyway, we digress. All right, so, because I confess all evil actions which I have done, influenced by the defilements, from time without beginning until now. That's positing a timeless mind stream with these habits of mind active in our mind streams. These habits of delusion, misreading and not seeing reality clearly, of hope, greed, and pride coming out of the delusion, fear, anger, jealousy, hatred coming out of delusion negatively. And these defilements are very much at the core of a Buddhist vision of purification and enlightenment. Without such delusions, there is nothing to get enlightened. Okay. Or as Thich Nhat Hanh has said, or in a flyer that came this past week regarding his teachings coming up, without you there is no Dharma. Without you there is no Dharma to practice. So please, I guess I'm asking for a gentle, soft, open consideration of the defilements. I don't want them to be seen as original sin in that sense, in a condemnatory sense. All right, the 5 acts that ripen immediately in the Tibetan Buddhist way of looking are killing one's mother or father, or an arhat, someone who has realized nirvana for himself, causing a Buddha, a fully realized Buddha, to bleed, or in another reading, shedding blood on a Buddha, but I think it's the first one, and then dividing a spiritual community of sincere practitioners. In other words, really wreaking havoc in a functioning Buddhist community. Sangha is considered to be one of the acts that will ripen immediately, will have immediate consequences. Okay, that brings us to the 10 non-virtuous acts, which are pretty loaded, actually, in some ways. Some of them are more controversial than others, particularly number 3, as of the last few years. But the 10 non-virtuous acts in Tibetan Buddhism are divided up into 3 of the body, 4 of speech, and 3 of the mind. The 3 of the body are killing, stealing, taking that which is not given. Sexual misconduct is one that has been open for discussion in the last few years. In its most basic definition, it's sexual harming another for one's own sexual gratification. The 4 of speech are lying, telling what you know is not true, harsh speech and slander, meaningless chatter, aka dish, which we're very good at. I should speak for myself. I can be very good at. And it's something to be mindful of, because it can have really damaging consequences. Again, the divisive speech which divides other people or communities. And then the 3 non-virtues of mind, which would be holding enmity, bad wishes, ill will, grudges. Grudges are in this category. Covetousness, craving something so badly that it distorts your picture of the world very, very deeply. And then the last non-virtue of mind would be holding wrong views. And wrong views would be the view that substantial independent self exists as either a personal self, or in some Tibetan schools as the self of any phenomena. Holding the view that things don't change really, when in fact they do, by the many moment. And then holding the view that suffering really doesn't exist, or doesn't exist, through grasping that which changes and is insubstantial. Okay. So far we have, with complete faith I prostrate to all the victorious ones and their children who abide in the 10 directions and 3 times. I offer flowers, incense, light, perfume, food, music, and many other things, both in substance and with my imagination. I ask the noble assemblage to accept them. I confess all evil actions which I have done, influenced by the defilements, from time without beginning until now, the 5 which ripen immediately, the 10 non-virtuous acts, and others. The next one goes on to be a celebration. I rejoice in the merit of whatever virtue Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and ordinary people gather throughout the 3 times. And ordinary people. This is a celebration of virtue, of the kindness, the simple kindness, the love, the good things, innumerable good things that happen every day by all beings. Another way to look at the non-virtues and to practice with them is to restate them as virtues, in which the ones that we mentioned before become cherishing of the body, cherishing life, giving freely, sex with kindness for the body, telling the truth, friendly speech, meaningful speech, conciliatory speech, and then for the mind, goodwill, really wishing others well, contentment, and right views. The right views of non-self, change, and suffering through grasping. Okay. Goes on to say, I pray for the wheel of the Dharma to be turned, the teachings of the Mahayana and Theravada in ways suitable for the different aptitudes and motivations present in sentient beings. Number 6, I ask the Buddhas not to pass into nirvana, but with great compassion and until samsara is completely empty, to look after all sentient beings who drown in this ocean of sorrow. And then finally, number 7, may whatever merit I have accumulated become a seed for the enlightenment of all beings. Without delay, may I become a splendid leader for sentient beings. So this is very much a Mahayana prayer. Are there any questions or comments on what?
Just almost a language question, but I think it was in the third one,
Okay.
about evil actions. And I thought the word evil was on. In that context, is there another possible word for that? Is it a translation? Because evil seems like such an absolutely non-Buddhist concept.
Yeah, it's used often actually in translations. It means harmful. It means actions of body, speech, and mind which are going to cause suffering at whatever level of others' body, speech, and mind. 1 second. Kaler Rinpoche he was very sometimes very terse, short in his teachings, and he summarized our practice at one point as saying, he just said, avoid evil, practice virtue, and train and understand the mind. He said, that's it. That was the whole thing.
Yeah, that's actually probably that's actually one of the verses of the Dhammapada, which is often the quote Jesus. So I wonder if it might be helpful if you could say why you think evil doesn't sound Buddhist.
Well, because I think
Lots
of evil,
of Christian connotations.
well, it's not only Christian connotation, but I think of evil as being almost a noun. It's being used as an adjective there. If something is evil, it's in other words, it's a pointed thing. Evil exists as a point.
Substantial.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of being, because we call something evil sometimes, but yet we're only looking at one aspect of it. Instead of all of the other possibilities, because nothing is ever just one thing like that. And I think the Christian concept of evil is a one thing idea very often, not always, but often. And so I think it always carries that, or sometimes it carries that Western context. So that's why the word seemed odd, because it has that pointed noun substantive sense to it, rather than being, for example, acts of ignorance and harm with or without intent.
Right.
So that's why I was kind of wondering about the word, if it had that substantive meaning to it or not, which it doesn't seem to from what you're saying.
Evil in this culture, it's a loaded word. I think that's fair to say. Darth Vader, and others.
If you call it unskillful or something like that.
Okay. Whatever works for you. I use harmful. I go / harmful for myself. But evil would be an interesting topic of discussion.
The shadow of darkness.
Yes. It's non-nurturing, non-supportive of enlightenment. Basically is the bottom line. It's something that isn't going to help oneself or other sentient beings on the way to freedom other than providing a practice opportunity. And evil does provide a practice opportunity, of course, because everything does. Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other, with respect to this prayer, any other comments or questions about this way of framing a vision? Setting an intention is what this prayer does to practice, to remind oneself.
One of the things that I think is very valuable about this, certainly you alluded to this, is that the confession of faults, which one puts out, those English words, and they tend to sound Christian maybe, but it's a really big part of Buddhist practice, the confession of faults, is then followed by rejoicing in merit. So one is encouraged to see both sides, and not to say, well, I'm just a mess, but I've also done some good things. And also for other beings, I can see that even the most evil or harmful beings have also, at some time in the past, even perhaps now, have done some good things.
Yes.
And so I think it helps us to be more balanced.
Yes. I think, I'd like to hear your feedback on this. I know when I first started to do this prayer, and I do it just about every day, I was I was attached to the confession, the negative part of the confession, more than I was to the positive. In other words, the balance is built into the prayer, but there almost seemed to be a sense that, oh my God, I'm doing this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong, and it was a daily reminder of screw-ups in terms of body, speech, and mind. That was, to some extent, and again, depending on how one feels about oneself at a given time, it can be more or less difficult to work with. Does that make any sense? In other words, going over, if you make it a practice to go over these 10 every day, it will, in a good way, invariably bring up stuff for you to look at every day. Because inevitably there will be grasping and self-assertive actions on these 10 non-virtues every day for all of us. They come with the territory in the package. And the point is not to beat oneself up and say this makes you a bad Buddhist or a bad person. It's simply there. It's just part of the show of what we do. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I almost find it a practice. The Zen one, is so vivid and so dark, and it's chanted at very low monotone. All my ancient twisted karma.
Do you know it? Do you know it by heart?
Yeah.
How can you say it? Because it's another way of doing it. Yeah.
Well, my point with it was,
okay.
Sure, but that rather than, I think the Buddha has actually said in some sutras, and I'm not sure, that it really is fruitless to try to trace back your karma. When he talked to the Jain monks, I think he said, well, monks, your karma is endless. You can't burn it all up. And so to get some view of, it really goes back, but I won't get to enlightenment by unraveling that and by concentrating on it.
Yeah. As if you're going to figure it out.
Right, so to say this huge statement about your twisted karma, and then to say, I now thoroughly avow.
Right.
Done. Just take it on and then that's it.
Please,
I'm not going any further with it.
Please define avow.
Avow, I accept, I let go, I release.
Here it is.
Here it is.
Dogen Zenji, the founder of Soto Zen, one of my favorite quotations from him is, "Practice is making one mistake after another." That is such a great one, and it's true. I mean, we are in this amazing grist for the mill, as someone else said. We're constantly losing our balance and finding it again, and falling on our butts and getting up again, and doing that, and that's what we do. And so I think the intention of these acknowledgments through the confession prayer, the 10 non-virtues, through the ancient twisted karma avowal, is simply to bring some of the shadow stuff within the context of sincere practice into awareness. It's okay to look at this stuff and to work with it skillfully. There's nobody that doesn't have it, in my experience. Okay. Anything else on this kind of way of? This is a way of setting intention again.
Yeah. One other comment on that is that the abbot, the abbot of Buddha chants it. You know, everyone chants this chant fully. You know, there's no. In other words, it takes you off the hook as an individual for being the worst of the worst guy. You know, everybody has karma. You got good company. Yeah. And then allows you to relax when it comes up. Right. Yeah. Depending on how we represent ourselves to ourselves, we can make either shortcomings or what's the opposite of shortcomings? Longcomings. We can make shortcomings or our good stuff very special things, you know, and it's not the point here. There's many different acts, many different levels to the 7-branch prayer. I invite you, if anyone is interested in Tibetan Buddha Dharma, probably the best introduction that I have seen is Introduction to Tantra by Lama Yeshe. It's a very, very good book if you're interested in exploring more in this much more ritualized and much more devotionally centered form of Buddhism than we typically see in Zen and Vipassana. Okay. Now you raised a great question about how do we, given where we are and where the rest of the world is, how do we find a teacher? What do we use to decide whether a potential teacher is good for us or not? Our teacher or a helpful teacher as opposed to a harmful teacher? And how does being gay impact that? Yeah, go ahead.
Could you preface this by talking a bit about what is a teacher? That's not clear to me.
Okay. Gulp. Well, there's many ways to answer this from my experience. A real teacher, in my experience, distracts me from samsara. A real teacher is so embodies the Buddha Dharma and the virtue or the power of the Buddha Dharma, which in Sanskrit I think is called prabhava, that real teachers have actually distracted me, got my attention away from my usual chasing my mind around the world for selfish positive or selfish negative purposes. The first teacher who had a great impact on me was Kubler Rinpoche. I went to a teaching by him in August of 1982. That's when I took refuge with him at Fort Mason. And I was like, I was stunned by his presence. I had never seen a being like him before. I had seen the Karmapa before, and I had seen a couple of other well-known Tibetan teachers. There was something about Kubler Rinpoche, though, that really knocked me flat, or lifted me up, whatever the word is. He was living the answer. He was clearly living energetically in a embodied way, in a different and seemed to be happier place, and a much freer place than I had seen. And so there was something in me that was very attracted to the wonder of him. And in my experience over the years, good teachers have that quality. They will be embodying the merit and the power of the Bodhidharma so strongly that they're not just speaking it with words. There have been teachers in all of our experience, I would guess, or I sincerely hope, that are like this. Within our own sub-community, gay Buddhist community over the years, I haven't seen all the teachers. Two teachers that have struck me as being fairly strong are Isan. Isan who dumbfounded us as well as being a teacher. He had a very strong practice. It was very had some true accomplishments, I think. Eric Kolvig, I don't know how many of you may have seen him or have done retreats with him. He's also, I think, a very sincere and good teacher. He has a presence to him. I haven't seen others like that in our community so far. In the development of the gay Buddhist world, we will need, they will come. I think, more positively put, I think they will come. They will emerge as more openly gay teachers make themselves known and are available to us. Things to watch with teachers. There's so many. The Dalai Lama, who is a teacher, he's one of my teachers for sure. I'm learning a lot with that one. He has said that one can take up to 12 years to evaluate a teacher. That he said, before you go giving your heart and your spiritual evolution, so to speak, to a Tibetan Lama, he is a very practical man in many ways. He said, you better darn well check him out, or her out. There are women teachers too. Check them out for a long time to make sure that they are trustworthy, not manipulative, hopefully not too stuck on homophobic teachings. And this is extremely sensitive stuff, and it's maybe, as Sogyal Rinpoche says and others, finding your root teacher, finding the person to guide you through the perils and pitfalls of the path, may be the most important relationship of your life, if not lifetimes, in the Tibetan view. This is an extremely important relationship. Unfortunately, some teachers do retrogress, even if they're born enlightened, and they're Rinpoches or Tukus or whatever they call themselves. Forces of Mara, the defilements can reassert themselves without being incubated, or rather without the virtues being incubated and antidotes asserted skillfully and appropriately. There are teachers who have done some pretty crazy and harmful things. And so you really should, with all of your heart, ask yourself, is this teacher harmful? It's a very simple question. Does this teacher have a good sense of, does this teacher feel grounded? Does this teacher have a pretty solid, or that's maybe solid's not the word, seem to be coming from a strong, grounded, and generous place, or from a selfish, nasty, self-assertive place? And there are some who come from, there are some who do that. There's some who are greedy. There are many, you've probably heard stories over the years of well-known teachers who have had real problems with sex. Baker Roshi, Soga Rinpoche come to mind. Maizumi Roshi. There have been a whole list. And whether or not these are problems with sex is also a good question, because there are lots of different theories as to what problems with sex are. But bottom line is there are some people who claim that they have been hurt by the sexual desires and agendas and unfinished business of different teachers. There's a whole website actually devoted to this, established by women, I think based in England, documenting what they consider to be sexual transgressions by Tibetan Buddhist teachers and others in particular. So another complicating factor in this, of course, are the different cultural takes on sex and the different cultural views of women and sex and men's relationships with women. There have been a few cases reported of sexual abuse between men teachers and men students, taking advantage of them. What does taking advantage mean? Is a good question. Were the students complicit, responsible as well as the teachers? These are all questions that come up into these arguments. They're not simple. Every one of us in this room is going to have a different threshold, a different reading as to what's harmful and what's not harmful, to some extent. So it's important for you, as the sentient being here, to question and to get clear as to what your take, your feelings, your deepest feelings are about harm and not harm. Yeah, go ahead.
With regard to my question about what is a teacher, perhaps I didn't state clearly. I meant it, at least initially, in a kind of mundane way of what does the teacher do, what does the student do. It's not clear to me whether this means they meet regularly, one goes to sittings with them, one prays to them, what. Mm-hmm. I presume there's probably alternatives to that, and I too have been thinking about possibly getting a teacher, and it isn't clear to me what that can mean.
Okay, that's good. That's a good thing. You just keep asking. I don't presume to have an answer, to that. I've seen so many different kinds of relationships. In the deepest practices of Guru Yoga, in Tibetan Buddhism, your teacher and you are one. And this can happen where a teacher is so much in your mind that, it can be a very, very extraordinarily intimate and powerful experience. to be working with a Tibetan teacher, for example. Same thing with a Zen teacher, and same thing with a Vipassana teacher. Their mission, if they accept it, and they do, especially the ones who have come back with that mission, so to speak, is to get you free. Is either to gently or through great fire, and I mean fire, to throw your stuff up to you so vividly that you have to pay attention to it. And they're there with the help of the Buddha Dharma and the Sangha and other teachers and their communities to help you deal with where you're stuck. And I am so stuck in so many places that they've had a field day with me, and they'll have a field day with just about anybody. That's their expertise, is to somehow help your life speak to you very strongly. I would recommend establishing a basic practice if you're new or you're thinking about the Buddha Dharma right now, before considering getting into a really heavy-duty, serious relationship with a Tibetan teacher. You can do that, of course, in the context of Tibetan Buddhism, but it's very important. It's very helpful to get clear on the basics first before you get hooked up with a Vajrayana thunderbolt, because they're powerful. Some of them. The basics, as far as I can see, that I keep coming back to again and again over many years, are the Four Noble Truths: the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, desire, attachment, the fact that an end of suffering exists, is possible, which is an amazing thing, and that there is a way to end suffering, articulated in the Eightfold Path as the basic teaching for all the different Buddhist traditions. The Eightfold Path takes different forms in the different traditions, but the basics are the same. The other basics are refuge. I ask myself, have I really taken refuge? Do I really want to get out of samsara? I mean, this is kind of a fun time to live. There's lots of distractions, and the religion of this culture is the basic religion is romantic sexual materialism. You will be happy through having, not through being, not through just being. You'll be happy through having the right lover, the right sex, the right PC, the right internet server, DSL for sure. That's I'm stuck on that one right now. If you think about what's thrown up at us daily, we're bombarded with these messages. You'll be happy through having, you name it. And so Buddhism is actually very radical for this society. It's posing the possibility that happiness isn't a matter of having anything, but rather of being and of connecting with a mode of being or a level of awareness in being, which is not dualistically fixated. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's been very edifying. I'm afraid our time is up.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Don't be afraid. Okay. Can I take it? All right. In my practice, we usually do a dedication at the end of teachings. In the Mahayana perspective, simply giving the virtue or merit of this mutual consideration to all beings, which ensures it in this view. In other words, it makes it less selfish. May the virtue of our meeting together and discussing together the Buddha Dharma benefit all aware beings who drown in this ocean of sorrow. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free of suffering and sorrow and the root of sorrow. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.